You think she was just a maid. But behind that smile, she was being paid to destroy the man who loved her the most. And what he found out was not just betrayal. It was a setup from day one. In a world where love meets money and secrets hide behind luxury walls, a billionaire opened his heart to the one person he should have never trusted. But every smile, every moment, every touch, was part of a plan he never saw coming. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just break his heart, it shattered his entire empire. Welcome back to Prime Tale. If you love emotional billionaire stories filled with betrayal, revenge, and shocking twists that keep you watching till the end, you are in the right place. Because this story is not just about love. It's about how far people will go when money is more important than the heart. The morning inside the Sterling mansion was unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that felt expensive, controlled, and almost suffocating. Every corner of the mansion reflected wealth. Polished marble floors, golden trims, tall glass windows stretching from floor to ceiling. Everything was perfect. But perfection always has one problem. It hides what's not perfect underneath. Down the long hallway, the sound of careful footsteps echoed softly. A young maid moved slowly, holding a cleaning cloth tightly in her hands. Her uniform was simple but neat. Her expression carried something heavier than exhaustion. Care, caution, like she was always aware that one mistake could end everything. She stopped near a decorative cabinet where a shattered porcelain vase had been placed in a tray. She didn't look surprised. She had already seen worse. Carefully, she knelt and began cleaning the broken pieces one by one. Each movement was slow, deliberate, controlled. Behind her, the mansion felt empty. But she was used to emptiness. It was part of her life now. A voice suddenly broke the silence. "Don't move too fast. You'll miss something." She froze. Her hands paused mid-motion. Slowly, she turned her head. Standing a few steps away was him, the owner of the mansion, the billionaire. He wasn't just rich. He was the kind of man whose name alone opened doors and closed lives. His presence didn't feel loud, but it filled the space completely. She quickly lowered her gaze. "I'm almost done, sir." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he observed her. Not in a harsh way. Not in anger. But in silence that felt heavier than judgment. He walked closer. The broken vase sat between them like a question that needed no answer. "This vase was imported," he said calmly. "It's worth more than most people's yearly salary." She swallowed slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't break it." A pause followed. Most people in his world would have apologized again, or panicked, or lied. But she didn't. She just stood there, still waiting. That caught his attention more than anything else. Slowly, he crouched slightly, picking up a small fragment of porcelain between his fingers. "Then who did?" "I don't know," she replied softly. "I found it like this when I came in." He looked at her again. Longer this time. Searching. But there was nothing exaggerated about her reaction. No fear trying to hide guilt. No story trying to sound convincing. Just honesty. And honesty was something he wasn't used to. He stood up. "You can finish cleaning it," he said finally. Then he walked away. But something unusual happened as he left. He didn't forget her face. Hours passed. The mansion returned to its usual rhythm. Staff moved quietly. Phones buzzed silently. Meetings happened behind closed doors. But somewhere inside that silence, something small began to shift. The billionaire moved through different parts of the house, reviewing documents, answering calls, controlling decisions worth millions. Yet his mind drifted back. Unexpectedly. The maid. Not her position. Not her appearance. Her reaction. He had met thousands of employees before. Some begged. Some lied. Some tried to impress him. But she had done none of that. That bothered him more than it should have. Later that afternoon, he passed through the garden corridor. She was there again. Washing flower pots. Focused. quiet, almost invisible. But not to him. He stopped a few meters away, watching. For a moment, she didn't notice him. She hummed softly under her breath while working. A faint, almost unnoticeable sound. Human. Real. That was new. He spoke without warning. "You're not from here, are you?" She paused immediately. Her hands tightened slightly around the cloth. "No, sir." "Then why work in a place like this?" Another pause. This one lasted longer. "I need the job," she said finally. He nodded slightly. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stayed where he was. Something about her answer didn't feel complete. Not because it was false, but because it was incomplete truth. Eventually, he turned and walked away again. But this time, the thought didn't leave with him. That night, the mansion lights dimmed into calm golden tones. From outside, it looked peaceful. Inside, it was controlled silence. The billionaire stood alone in his office, overlooking the city through a massive glass wall. Cars moved like tiny lights below. Lives he didn't care about. Yet tonight something felt off. He loosened his tie slightly and leaned back in his chair. Annoyed at himself. "You're thinking too much," he muttered. But even as he said it, his mind refused to obey. The maid's face kept appearing. Not as an image, but as a feeling. Something unexplainable. Meanwhile, downstairs, the maid finished her work late. The other staff had already left. She walked through the corridor alone. The mansion was darker now. Quieter. More honest in its silence. She stopped near a window overlooking the city. Her reflection stared back at her. For a moment, her expression changed. The calmness faded slightly. Like a mask slipping. Her phone vibrated. She quickly looked around before answering. "Hello." A man's voice came through the line. "You're getting too comfortable." Her grip tightened on the phone. "I'm doing what you asked." A short laugh came from the other side. "That's not enough. Remember why you're there." Her jaw tightened. "I remember." A pause. Then the voice continued. "Good. Because failure isn't an option." The call ended. She stood still for a moment, staring at the dark screen. Then she exhaled slowly and returned to work like nothing happened. Above her in the office, the billionaire closed his laptop. He walked toward the window. Something didn't feel right. Not danger. Not alarm. Something quieter. Like a thread he couldn't see, slowly tightening around his life. And without knowing why, his eyes drifted once again toward the hallway where she worked. But what he didn't know was this. Every step she took inside his mansion was already part of a plan. And the first sign of trust was the beginning of everything collapsing. The mansion looked the same on the outside. Perfect. Quiet. Controlled. But inside, something subtle had already begun to shift. Not in the walls. Not in the staff. In him. The billionaire CEO moved through his morning routine with precision, like always. Meetings were scheduled down to the minute, calls already waiting, decisions worth millions stacking before he even finished his coffee. Yet today something was different. He paused twice without realizing it. Once in the hallway. Once near the dining area. Each time, the same reason. Her. The maid. She was already working when he noticed her again. Same uniform. Same quiet posture. Same careful movements. But now she wasn't just background noise in his house. She was becoming something else. A pattern. A thought that refused to disappear. He watched her briefly from a distance. She was wiping down a polished table, focused completely on her task. No distractions. No hesitation. And yet, there was something unnatural about how composed she looked, as if she had trained herself to never be seen. He turned away first, but curiosity stayed behind. That afternoon, he left the mansion without announcing it. A black luxury car drove through the city streets. Glass buildings. Busy roads. Noise everywhere. But inside the car, everything was silent. He didn't like silence. It made thoughts louder. And today, thoughts were the problem. His driver spoke once. "Sir, the usual route?" "Yes," he replied without looking away from his phone. But he wasn't reading anything. His screen was open, but untouched. His mind was elsewhere. Back in the mansion. Back on her. He frowned slightly, irritated at himself. "I don't get distracted," he muttered under his breath. But even as he said it, he knew something was wrong. At the same time, inside the city, somewhere far from the mansion's luxury, a dimly lit restaurant sat tucked between tall buildings. Not the kind of place he would normally go, but someone else was already waiting. A man in a dark suit sat at a corner table. Confident posture. Relaxed smile. Too calm for someone who had no reason to be. A woman entered moments later. The maid. But not in her uniform. This time, she wore simple civilian clothes. Different look. Same face. She hesitated at the entrance, then walked straight to the table. The man didn't stand. He simply pushed a small envelope forward. It slid across the table until it stopped in front of her. She didn't touch it immediately. Her eyes stayed on it, then on him. "What is this?" she asked quietly. The man smiled slightly. "Something you've already agreed to." "I agreed to work," she replied. "Not this." He leaned back. "You don't get to separate the two anymore." That sentence made her expression tighten slightly. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Not fear. Not confusion. Pressure. The man tapped the envelope once. "Inside is confirmation. Everything you need for the next step." She didn't open it. Instead, she lowered her voice. "This is getting harder than you said it would be." He shrugged. "Because you're getting closer." Her grip tightened slightly at her side. A pause. Then she asked the question she didn't want to ask. "How long do I have to keep doing this?" The man smiled again, but this time it was colder. "Until he trusts you completely." Silence. That word hung in the air longer than it should have. Trust. She looked down at the envelope again. Then slowly, she finally touched it. But she didn't open it yet. Not because she didn't want to. Because part of her already knew what was inside. And she didn't like that part of herself anymore. Back at the mansion, the billionaire returned just before sunset. He walked in quietly. But something felt off the moment he stepped inside. Not visibly wrong. Just subtle. Like a shift in energy. He loosened his jacket slightly and walked through the hallway. Then he stopped. Near the corner where she usually worked. Empty. For the first time. She wasn't there. That shouldn't have mattered. But it did. He looked around once. A passing staff member walked by. "Where is she?" he asked without thinking. The staff member blinked. "The maid, sir." He nodded. "She stepped out earlier this afternoon." "Did she say where?" "No, sir." The staff member left quickly. But the billionaire stayed still. He didn't like that answer. Not because it was suspicious, but because it was incomplete. He continued walking, but slower now, as if listening to something the house wasn't saying out loud. Upstairs, in a quiet corridor, the maid had returned. She moved quickly now. Less relaxed. More careful. Like time mattered more than usual. She stopped briefly near a mirror. Looked at her reflection. Her expression wasn't the same as before. It wasn't calm. It wasn't innocent. It was conflicted. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. Harder. Stronger. As if forcing herself back into character. And continued walking. That night, the billionaire stood alone in his office again. City lights stretched endlessly in front of him. But his focus wasn't there. It was elsewhere. On timing. On patterns. On her absence. On the strange feeling that had started building without permission. He exhaled slowly. "This shouldn't matter," he said quietly. But it already did. Downstairs, the maid stood near the mansion entrance for a moment, holding something small in her hand. The envelope. She didn't open it. She simply held it tighter, then walked back inside like nothing had changed. But something had. Inside the same mansion, two lives were moving closer, without either of them fully understanding why. And somewhere beyond both of them, the plan was already adjusting itself, because trust was no longer being built. It was being prepared. The night in the mansion felt heavier than usual, not because anything had changed physically, but because something inside it was starting to breathe differently. Silence no longer felt neutral. It felt loaded, like it was hiding something. The maid stood alone in the upper hallway long after most of the staff had gone to rest. Her footsteps were slower now, less confident than before. She stopped near a window. The city lights outside flickered endlessly. Cars moving, lives continuing, people unaware of what was unfolding behind glass walls and luxury doors. She stared at it for a long moment, then lowered her gaze. Her reflection stared back at her, but it didn't feel like her anymore. It felt like someone she was slowly becoming. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her uniform. A quiet breath escaped her lips. For a second, she almost spoke to herself, but didn't. Instead, she turned away from the window and continued walking. Downstairs, the billionaire was still awake. He rarely slept early. Control required awareness. Awareness required sacrifice. But tonight, even work couldn't fully hold his attention. He sat in his office, documents open, phone beside him, unread messages stacking. Yet his eyes kept drifting away from the screen. Back to thought. Back to memory. Back to her. He frowned slightly, annoyed. "This is unnecessary," he said quietly to himself. But his voice didn't change anything. He leaned back in his chair. The city outside reflected in the glass wall in front of him. But something else reflected too. A pattern he hadn't noticed before. Small inconsistencies. Her presence. Her absence. The timing. He exhaled, then stood up. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the mansion kitchen, the maid was alone again. She poured herself a glass of water but didn't drink it immediately. Instead, she just held it, staring into it like it had answers. Her phone vibrated. She hesitated before checking it. A message. No name. Just a single line. "Why are you slowing down?" Her grip tightened instantly. She looked around quickly, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Then she typed back, "I'm not slowing down." A few seconds passed. Then another message came. "Be careful. Emotional attachment is dangerous." She froze. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Emotional attachment. That word lingered too long in her mind. She locked her phone immediately. And for the first time that night, she looked unsettled. Later that night, she walked through the mansion corridor again. But this time, she wasn't alone in her thoughts. Her mind kept replaying moments. The billionaire looking at her. His questions. His silence. His attention. She shook her head slightly. "No," she whispered under her breath. But the doubt had already entered. And doubt, once it enters, it grows. She stopped walking, placed a hand on the wall for balance, took a slow breath, then forced herself forward again. Upstairs, the billionaire stood near his office window. The city below looked the same, but he wasn't looking at it anymore. He was thinking about something smaller. A detail. A feeling. A contradiction. She wasn't acting like someone with nothing to hide. But she also wasn't acting like someone guilty. That was the problem. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "Then what are you?" he muttered. Silence answered. The next morning arrived too quickly. Sunlight entered the mansion through tall glass panels. Everything looked normal again. Too normal. The maid resumed her work as usual. Cleaning. Organizing. Moving quietly through the halls. But something had changed in her rhythm. She was more aware now. of footsteps, of glances, of presence, especially his. Whenever the billionaire appeared in the hallway, she felt it immediately, even before seeing him, and that feeling made her uncomfortable, because it wasn't part of the plan. That afternoon, the billionaire passed her again. This time, he stopped longer than before. She felt it before she turned. His presence behind her. She turned slowly. Yes, sir. He studied her. Not aggressively. Not warmly. Just observant. Like he was trying to read something invisible. You seem different today, he said calmly. Her expression didn't change immediately. I'm just working, sir. A pause. He nodded slightly, but didn't leave. Instead, he asked something unexpected. Do you ever regret working here? That question hit differently. Not loud, but deep. She hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, then replied, No, sir. But her eyes betrayed something else, and he noticed it. That night, after everyone had gone quiet again, she stood alone in the storage room, her phone in hand, the envelope from before now sitting in her drawer, untouched. She stared at it for a long time, then finally opened it slightly. Inside were instructions. Clear, precise, cold. Her breathing slowed. She closed it again immediately, not because she didn't understand it, but because she did, and understanding it made it worse. Above her in the office, the billionaire reviewed security logs. Nothing unusual. No threats. No alarms. No breaches. But still, something felt off. He leaned back slowly. This doesn't make sense, he said quietly. And for the first time, the suspicion wasn't about what he saw. It was about what he didn't see. And somewhere between both of them, the truth was still forming. Slowly, quietly, patiently. Because betrayal doesn't begin with action. It begins with trust, growing in the wrong place. The mansion no longer felt the same to him. Not because anything visible had changed, but because his mind had started noticing things it used to ignore. Small things. Patterns. Gaps. The billionaire stood in front of the massive glass window in his office, watching the city move like it always did. Cars. Lights. People. Everything normal. But normal was no longer convincing. He exhaled slowly, then turned away from the window. He didn't go to meetings that morning. Instead, he walked through the mansion quietly. No destination. Just observation. Staff greeted him as usual, but he barely acknowledged them. His focus was elsewhere. Always the same direction. Her. The maid. She was in the garden corridor again. Working. Quiet. Consistent. Too consistent. He stopped at a distance where she couldn't immediately notice him. Watched. She was watering plants carefully, moving in a rhythm that looked natural. But now, he was analyzing rhythm, timing, behavior. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Too calm, he thought. Not as admiration. As data. She suddenly paused, like she felt something. Slowly she turned. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt different now. He stepped forward slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough to be noticed. You always work alone, he said calmly. She blinked once. I prefer it that way, sir. That answer was simple. But simplicity no longer comforted him. It made him question what was being left out. He nodded slightly, then walked past her. But this time, he didn't forget the interaction. He stored it. Later that day, something changed. The billionaire called one of his private security analysts. A man who didn't ask questions, only delivered answers. I need access to internal movement logs, he said. The analyst hesitated slightly. Mansion logs, sir? Yes. Any specific time frame? Start from last week. There was a pause. Then the analyst responded. Understood. The call ended. That evening, the mansion looked peaceful again. But inside that peace, something was being scanned, reviewed, broken down. Invisible surveillance systems quietly activated deeper access levels. The house was no longer just a home. It was becoming a system. And he was studying it. Meanwhile, downstairs, the maid moved through her tasks like usual. But something subtle had changed in her awareness. She felt it more now. Being watched. Not directly. Not obviously. But constantly. She paused near the kitchen entrance. Looked around slowly. Nothing. Just silence. But silence no longer felt empty. It felt monitored. She tightened her grip on the cloth in her hand. And continued working. Later that night, a report appeared on the billionaire screen. He sat in his office alone. The light from the monitor reflected in his eyes. Movement log, normal. He frowned. He leaned closer. Read again. Nothing suspicious. No irregular entries. No unusual exits. No unexplained activity. But instead of relaxing, he became more alert. Because perfect data was rarely real. He closed the file slowly. "This is too clean," he muttered. He stood up, walked to the door, then stopped. For a moment, he considered something he normally wouldn't. Noticing her wasn't the problem anymore. Ignoring her was becoming harder. Downstairs, she stood near a mirror in a hallway. For a brief moment, she looked at herself again. Not the maid version. The real version. Her expression tightened slightly. She whispered, "This is getting complicated." But there was no one to hear her. Only the house. And the house never answered. Back in the office, the billionaire made a decision. He opened a new system. A personal one. Hidden access. He typed slowly. Monitor key staff movement in real time. Then paused. One name came to his mind. He hesitated for half a second. Then added it. Not because he had proof, but because he no longer trusted absence of proof. The name entered the system. And everything changed. The next morning, nothing looked different. Same mansion. Same routines. Same faces. But now, one person inside that house was being watched more closely than ever before. Without knowing it, the maid walked past the corridor again. Unaware. Calm on the outside. But something inside her had started reacting. Subtle unease. Like pressure building in silence. She stopped briefly. Looked around. Nothing. But her instincts had already changed. And instincts don't lie easily. Upstairs, the billionaire watched live data streams. Movement tracking. Time stamps. Location pings. Everything aligned. Too perfectly. He leaned back slowly. "This is wrong," he said quietly. Not because something was missing, but because nothing was. And perfection was becoming the biggest suspicion of all. And somewhere inside the mansion, two people continued walking the same halls. One thinking she was hiding a secret. The other slowly realizing there was a secret worth finding. Neither of them understood yet that the real trap was not betrayal. It was proximity. The night arrived quietly over the mansion. But this time, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt aware. Like the house itself had begun holding secrets. Inside the billionaire's office, multiple screens glowed in the dim light. Movement logs. Security feeds. Time stamps. Everything from the mansion was now being observed in real time. He sat still, watching without blinking for long stretches. Not tired. Focused. Controlled. But something inside him was changing. He was no longer reacting. He was waiting. Downstairs, the maid moved through her usual late tasks. But her rhythm had shifted slightly. She checked corners more often. Paused longer between rooms. Listened more than she needed to. Something about the mansion felt different tonight. Not louder. Not busier. Just a heavier, She tightened her grip on her cleaning cloth and kept moving. Outside the mansion gates, a black car arrived without announcement. No headlights flashing unnecessarily. No noise. Just presence. Inside, the same man from before sat calmly in the back seat. The one who had given her the envelope. He checked his watch, then sent a message. Proceed. Inside the mansion, the maid's phone vibrated. She stopped immediately, looked around once, then stepped into a quiet hallway. Her expression changed as she read the message. Back gate. 10 minutes. Her jaw tightened slightly. She exhaled slowly. Not fear. Pressure. Upstairs. The billionaire was watching. Not physically. Through systems. Cameras. Movement tracking. But something caught his attention. A shift. One staff movement leaving standard pattern flow. He leaned forward slightly. Eyes narrowing. Where are you going? He muttered. He opened the live feed. Switched cameras. Back gate. Dim lighting. Empty corridor outside the mansion boundary. And then, he saw her. The maid. Standing near the gate. Waiting. Not working. Not cleaning. Waiting. His expression didn't change outwardly. But internally, something tightened. Moments later, the black car door opened. The same well-dressed man stepped out. He looked around briefly, then approached her. They spoke quickly. Low voices. Urgent tone. She handed something small to him. A folded item. He nodded once, then gave her something in return. An envelope. Again. The exchange lasted less than a minute. Then the man turned and left. Back into the car. Gone. Inside the mansion office, the billionaire replayed the footage. Once. Then again. Zooming in. Slowing down. Studying. He didn't move for a long time. Then finally spoke under his breath. So it's real. Not shock. Confirmation. He stood up slowly. Walked to the window. Looked down at the mansion grounds. The same place he had trusted for years. The same place he controlled completely. Now, it felt slightly different. Not unsafe. Not broken. But compromised. Downstairs. The maid re-entered through the side corridor. Normal pace. Normal expression. Back to routine. Like nothing had happened. But something had. Because now, she was aware. That time was no longer invisible. And neither was she. She stopped briefly in front of a mirror again. Looked at herself. Longer this time. Her expression didn't fully match the calm she was trying to show. A faint conflict appeared in her eyes. She whispered quietly, "This is getting harder." Then stopped herself. Looked away. And continued walking. Upstairs. The billionaire sat back down. But he didn't close the system. Instead, he opened a deeper layer. Restricted logs. Behavior mapping. Pattern analysis. Now it wasn't just observation. It was interpretation. He leaned forward. Eyes fixed. "This isn't random," he said slowly. "It's structured." And that realization changed everything. Because structured behavior means design. And design means intent. Elsewhere in the mansion, the maid stood alone in the kitchen again, the envelope from earlier hidden away, her hand resting on the counter. Still, quiet, but her breathing slightly uneven. Not panic, not fear, something more dangerous. Conflict. Upstairs, the billionaire closed his eyes briefly. Not tired. Processing. Then opened them again. He made a decision. Not spoken. Not announced. But internal. From this moment, he would stop watching from distance and start closing the gap. Because now, it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was suspicion turning into certainty. And certainty always demands action. And somewhere between both of them, the system they were both inside of was no longer neutral. It was evolving. The mansion no longer felt like a place of routine. It felt like a place of observation. Every hallway seemed longer. Every silence more deliberate. Every movement potentially meaningful. Inside the billionaire's office, the lights were dimmer than usual. Multiple screens were still open. Paused footage. Zoomed frames. Repeated moments. He had watched the same scene over and over again. The back gate. The exchange. The envelope. The meeting. There was no longer confusion in his mind. Only structure. And structure meant intent. He leaned back slowly in his chair. Expression unreadable. But his eyes were not calm anymore. They were calculating. Downstairs, the maid continued her duties as usual. Too usual. That was the problem now. Nothing about her routine changed. No visible nervousness. No mistakes. No hesitation. But internally, everything had changed. She felt it. The house. The air. The presence. Something was different. Like time itself had become heavier. She paused near a polished surface. Looked at her reflection. For a brief moment, she didn't recognize herself. Then she blinked. And continued working. Upstairs, the billionaire stood. Slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He walked out of his office. Through the hallway. Down the stairs. Each step controlled. Deliberate. Not angry. Not emotional. Focused. The mansion staff noticed him moving differently. Not his usual passing presence. But directed movement. Like he knew exactly where he was going. He didn't greet anyone. Didn't acknowledge anything. His destination was already decided. The maid was in the main corridor when she saw him approaching. She stopped immediately. Something in her posture changed. Not fear, but awareness. He stopped a few steps away from her. Silence. A long one. Then he spoke. Calm voice. Low tone. Come with me. No explanation. No context. Just instruction. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then nodded. Yes, sir. They walked together. Through the mansion. Past rooms. Past staff. Past everything familiar. Neither of them spoke. But the silence between them was no longer neutral. It was heavy. Like something already decided. They entered a private room. Not an office. Not a common space. A controlled environment. Glass windows sealed. No interruptions. He closed the door behind them. Locked it. Click. That sound changed the atmosphere instantly. She stood near the center of the room. He remained closer to the door. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her. Not like before. Not curiosity anymore. Not analysis. Confirmation. Finally, he spoke. I saw you. Her expression didn't change immediately. But something inside her shifted. I don't understand, sir, she replied carefully. He took a step forward. Slow. Measured. I saw the exchange, he said. Silence. That word alone changed the air. Her breathing slowed slightly. But she didn't move. Didn't panic. Didn't deny immediately. That pause was enough. He continued. The car. The gate. The envelope. Each word landed heavier than the last. He studied her reaction closely. Not rage. Not accusation. Observation. She finally spoke. Her voice quieter now. I can explain. But he interrupted immediately. No. One word. Sharp. Controlled. Then softer again. Not yet. That response confused her more than anger would have. He wasn't breaking. He wasn't exploding. He was building. Understanding. He walked closer. Stopped at a distance where only truth mattered. Who are you working for? He asked. She looked down for a brief moment. Then back up. I don't have a choice, she said. That sentence changed something in his expression. Slight shift. Not empathy. Recognition. Everyone has a choice, he replied. She shook her head slightly. You don't understand. A pause. Then she added, if I don't do it, someone else will suffer. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was loaded. He studied her carefully. For the first time, the structure he believed he saw wasn't as clear. There was something underneath it. Something forced. Not fully voluntary. Not fully free. He exhaled slowly. This is bigger than I thought, he said quietly. Not to her. To himself. She looked at him now differently. Not as employer. Not as billionaire. But as someone who might finally see part of the truth. But he wasn't done. Not even close. I want everything, he said firmly. Her eyes widened slightly. You mean? All of it, he interrupted. From the beginning. Silence. A long one. She hesitated. Then slowly said, you won't like what you hear. He didn't respond immediately. Then finally, I already don't. And for the first time in the entire story, the distance between them didn't feel like hierarchy anymore. It felt like collision. Two truths. About to crash. And somewhere outside the room, the system that had been quietly operating in the background had already noticed the change. Because secrets don't survive confrontation for long. They evolve. Or they collapse. The room stayed silent after her last words. Not the empty kind of silence. The kind that feels compressed. Like it's waiting for something to break it. The billionaire didn't speak immediately. He just stood there. Watching her. Processing her. Not as an employee. Not as a suspect. But as a contradiction he couldn't fully classify yet. She stood still in the center of the room. Hands lowered. Eyes no longer fully steady. For the first time since he met her, the control she always carried was starting to crack. Not visibly dramatic, but subtle. Breathing slightly uneven. Shoulders tighter than before. Like holding something heavy inside. He finally turned away. Walked a few steps toward the glass wall. The city outside looked unchanged. But his perception of everything inside the mansion had shifted. He spoke without turning back. You said you don't have a choice. A pause. Explain that. Behind him she hesitated. This was the point she had avoided. The line she wasn't supposed to cross. But now, she was already past too many lines. I owe someone, she said quietly. He didn't react immediately. So she continued. And if I don't follow through, they don't just punish me. A pause. Her voice lowered. They punish my family. That changed the air. Not dramatically, but structurally. Something inside his understanding shifted slightly. Not acceptance. Not sympathy. Adjustment. He turned slowly back toward her. So this isn't about money, he said. She shook her head slightly. No. A pause. Then she added. It started that way, but it's not anymore. Silence again. Longer this time. He studied her expression. There was no pride in it. No manipulation. Just exhaustion. And conflict. That detail mattered more than anything else so far. He walked back toward her slowly. Not aggressive. Controlled. Measured. He stopped a few steps away. You're saying you're being used, he said. She didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. That word didn't come easily. It felt admitted. Not confessed. Reluctant truth. He exhaled slowly. For the first time, frustration wasn't directed at her. It was directed at the situation itself, because clarity was still missing. And he hated missing clarity. He turned away again, thinking, processing, then spoke. Who is controlling this? She looked down slightly. I don't know everything, she said. But I know enough to not disobey. That answer made him pause, because fear was now clearly part of the structure. Not simple obligation. Something enforced. Something deeper. He sat down slowly in a nearby chair, not breaking eye contact for long, then said, "You're not the only one involved." She looked at him immediately. That wasn't a question. It was a realization forming out loud. He leaned forward slightly. "There was a meeting," he said. "A transfer. A repeated pattern. Multiple entries that don't match normal behavior." He paused. "Which means you've been coordinated." Her breathing changed slightly. She didn't respond. Because she already knew he was getting closer. Too close. He stood again. Walked a small circle around the room. Not pacing emotionally. Thinking structurally. Then stopped. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said again. This time slower. Heavier. "I decide what matters after I hear it." She stayed silent for a moment. Long enough that he thought she might refuse. Then she spoke. "I was approached months ago." A pause. "They told me I would only be observing at first." Another pause. "But it changed." She stopped again. Her hands tightened slightly. "Because I started reporting things I didn't understand." He narrowed his eyes slightly. "Reporting to who?" She hesitated. Then, "I don't know the name." That answer frustrated him. But he didn't interrupt. She continued. "But I know the results were always the same. They already knew what I saw before I reported it." That statement landed differently. Not emotionally. Logically. That meant surveillance outside her awareness. Or inside the system already. He looked down slightly. "This is not a simple setup," he muttered. She suddenly looked up at him. For the first time that night. Her voice changed. Not softer. More honest. "I didn't want you to get involved." That line hit a different layer. He noticed it, but didn't respond immediately. A long silence followed. Neither of them spoke. The weight of everything said now filled the room completely. Finally he stood. Slow. Controlled. "I don't like being played," he said quietly. Then looked at her. "And I don't like not knowing who's behind it." She nodded slightly. Almost relieved. But also afraid. Because now, it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him entering it fully. He walked to the door. Paused. Then said without turning back, "From now on, nothing moves without me knowing." Click. The door unlocked. Opened. She stayed in the room. Still. Processing. Because the moment that just ended was no longer just confrontation. It was alignment. Dangerous alignment. Outside the room. The system they were both trapped inside had already started adapting again. Because when truth gets closer, the architecture behind lies starts defending itself. The mansion no longer felt like a background setting. It felt like a structure under inspection. Every wall, every corridor, every quiet space was now part of something being evaluated. Inside the billionaire's private office, the atmosphere had changed completely. No longer confusion. No longer suspicion alone. Now reconstruction. He wasn't guessing anymore. He was connecting. Screens in front of him displayed timelines, movement logs, financial traces, and repeated external contact patterns linked to the maid's activity. But what stood out wasn't what existed. It was what aligned too perfectly, too intentionally. He leaned forward slightly. Eyes locked on the data. "This is not random," he said quietly. It never was. Downstairs, the maid stood in her room alone. The envelope she had received earlier lay on the table. Still unopened. But now, it felt heavier than before. Not physically. Mentally. Like its presence had changed meaning. She stared at it for a long time. Then finally opened it fully. Inside were structured instructions. Names. Schedules. And one repeated phrase. "Ensure full trust before final phase." Her breathing slowed. She had read it before.